o'clock, so why don't we go ahead and get started here. Before I turn it over to Mr. Bierkan, I've got a few quick things to go over. We are recording today, so the recording will be up on our YouTube channel within a few days. For future reference, or if you ever need to share with anyone, you're more than welcome to. If you have any technical issues, please put those into the chat function, and I will do my best to help you through those. Just be aware that most of the time the issues stem from your own Wi-Fi connection. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put those into the chat feature as well, and I will prompt John as needed. Finally, if anyone has called in via telephone today, please shoot me an email at mfrey@pgahq.com, and we'll make sure you get your MSR credits. So I'd like to introduce John Bierkan. He is a PGA professional who has been dedicated to teaching and helping golfers improve for over 18 years. He is the son of a PGA professional and is from Middlefield, Connecticut. He is a two-time Philadelphia PGA Teacher of the Year and has done a lot to help us out throughout the past few years working with the instruction committee. So with that, I will turn it over to John.
All right. Thank you. Let me just switch over here. See if we can get this working. Perfect. All right. Everyone can still hear me?
Yes, sir. Okay,
great. Well, first of all, thanks everyone for taking some time to join in and listen. I'm hopeful that you'll, when this is over, you'll feel like you've learned a few things. So I want to thank each of you for logging in. Couple thank yous first and foremost. Matt, thank you for your time and guiding me through some of the preparation behind the scenes with Google Meet and being ready to go. I appreciate that. And obviously you've been a great addition to the section, and you know, we really appreciate everything you've done. I know you've been working really hard with all these webinars over the last year, so thank you. Also, just a big thank you to Andy Miller for all of his work as the instruction committee chair, and he's done an awesome job and was part of the reason that we put some of these educational webinars together. So thanks for asking me to be involved. So today's topic is going to be pitching. And let me say this, there's a lot of different ways I could have gone with this presentation. Kind of the way I decided to go was, like I said, I probably almost over prepared with a touch too much information that I'm going to kind of cram in. But what I wanted to do, my goal was, and this is very much going to be about, you know, that 20, 30, 40, up to 50-yard stock pitch shot. This is very much going to be more from a true instructional piece, more of what are the technical, for lack of a better word, the technical components that we need to be looking at to help our players hit better pitch shots. This isn't going to be like a dissertation on spin loft and what you need to do from 43 yards to get 9,000 RPMs of spin on a pitch shot. Obviously, spin loft is part of the overall equation, but this is more of like, what's the foundation? What are the nuts and bolts of helping our club players, our members, hit better pitch shots? So, like I said, I could have gone just spent an hour just talking about aspects of distance control and practice drills. But I just wanted to say, all right, this is how I picture the technique and how the club's coming down into the ground and contacting the ground and the golf ball. So those are like the main contributing components. So that's kind of the way we're going to look at this. I'm going to briefly touch on some of the steep and shallow components of balancing out the motion, talk about the importance of the arc height or the arc depth. Then kind of some things, just a handful of things you might hear me say out on the lesson tee, little one-liners that I use with students. that pertain to pitching. We're going to look at some drills. I'm going to switch eventually from this PowerPoint presentation to my iPad. And I've got some drills that I've put up on my iPad through Huddle, the app that I use. And if time allows, I hope so that we're going to look at just a few examples of some lessons, some kind of before and afters, and talk through those a little bit. We could spend, hours just looking at real life lesson examples like befores and afters. This is definitely one of those kinds of seminar slash webinars that would be better in person, right? To see the action, to see how I go about changing something, to look at the contact, to watch the ball flight change. Nonetheless, I still feel confident that you'll leave here with some good things and maybe just a little different way of looking at pitching or some specifics of what you'll look for. Having said that, I think we'll rock and roll here. So I'm gonna try to get all of this in within an hour, probably tops an hour and 15 minutes. So that's my goal. If you have to log off, I certainly understand that. But so again, what I wanted to do was I'm giving you a little bit more. We're not going to dive in with a ton of detail, but enough to say, okay, if you were filming or watching your student hit pitch shots, these are like the go-to things you want to be thinking about and looking for. All right, so here's the big picture. The big picture is when we're hitting pitch shots, and my definition of a pitch shot would be any shot, reasonably close to the green, let's say max 50 yards, but I would say a lot of 20, 30-yard shots around the green where there's more air time and less roll time. To me, I would define that as a pitch shot. Quite candidly, a lot of them probably are going to be 20, 30 yards, maybe 40 yards off the green. So this is the big picture, though. I'm thinking, and when I'm watching people hit shots and watching their technique, I'm thinking about the arc of that club. So obviously the club goes back, and then all of these are downswing sequences. Thinking about the arc of the club and the downswing, okay? Is the arc narrow? Is it wide? Is the club too low to the ground? Is it too high to the ground relative coming into the golf ball? So if you look at the bottom of the arc, somewhere around the bottom of the arc, somewhere between approximately those two red arrows, that's what I would define as the bottom of the arc. So the club's working down, it has like a little flat spot, and then it's coming back up again. And we're going to talk about that coming back up piece. So to me, that's the big picture. That's what I'm looking at, what the body's doing. I'm looking a lot at what the arms and the wrists are doing, and then obviously what the club is doing. Okay, so here's a laundry list of components. So some of the ones that I've listed first that are bolded are the ones that get more attention. And as we go through the presentation, I'm going to, say, all right, this piece gets an asterisk. But for these that are bolded, these definitely get more attention. So one of the big things is the radius of that arc, right? So the radius is really created right by the length of our arms. So is the left arm long? Is the left arm bent? Is the right arm bent? Is the right arm going long, right? Are the arms close to the body? Are they far away from the body? Those are pieces that are going to affect the contact. So the radius and arc width, which is essentially directly related to our arm structure, which we'll talk more about. The attack angle, right? The attack angle is essentially created by these different components that we're going to look at, but it's something to know, right? So obviously, if you were teaching pitching on a launch monitor on TrackMan, let's say, you would be able to measure that. That's a component of it. But to me, attack angle essentially is a net result of all the other movements or patterns that you have. Here's a biggie. So radius and arm structure, big asterisks. Those are a big thing. The arc height, or what some people call the arc depth. Okay, we're going to look more at that. That's pivotal. So for example, you could have an attack angle coming down 5 or 6 degrees on a pitch shot, but actually have the height of the arc of the club coming into the ground not get stuck in the ground. It might not be steep into the ground, even though the attack angle's 5 or 6 down. And conversely, you could have a lot of shallow patterns, but if one thing's out of place where the club gets into the ground before the ball, a shallow pattern actually caused the club to go down into the ground. It wasn't necessarily steep. And I think sometimes those two get mixed together. But anyway, nonetheless, the height of that arc, or the depth of where the club is arcing, coming down into the ground relative to the ball, is extremely important. And that ties in with the low point. Simply, where is the club reaching its lowest point in the arc, right? And so hopefully that's going to be at or really a little bit in front of the ball. Horizontal hand path. I'm going to talk more about that. Put a big asterisk next to that. That's a huge thing. That's going to be the path of the hands relative to the horizon. Shoulder and spine tilt. We're going to look at some pictures and talk briefly about that. That's a big thing. Flexion, extension of the torso. Simply, right, are you flexed over and going lower to the ground, or is your body extending and coming up away from the ground? That's an important thing. Connection and synchronization of the arms to the body. We're going to look at some pictures and video and talk about that. Simply, are you physically keeping your arms connected to your body, especially up at the armpits and the top of the rib cage? And then are the arms in the club, are they synchronized with the rotation of the body? So that's something I look at. And you can see a lot of that on video. Wrist angles, big deal. You could have everything perfect in your motion, but if the wrist angles change, you can change the attack angle, you can change the height of the arc of the club coming down into the ground. Body rotation and lateral motion, those will play a big role really in where the club is, how the club's moving forward and getting the low point more forward. We'll talk a little bit about that. Spin loft, by definition, right, it's a component. We're not going to talk a lot about that today, but spin loft is simply, we know, right, it's the attack angle and the dynamic loft together. So that loft dynamically at impact plays a role in creating spin. Okay, that would be where maybe if you could use that with any player, but you'd probably use it with better players and looking at, what are some things we can try to do to generate more spin. For our average club player, to me, it would be near the bottom of the priority list. Let's get the contact better, then let's get the distance control better. And, for our average club player, they could spend hours and hours just working on technique for contact and distance control and not really even worry that much about spin, at least in my opinion. And then some other components just to watch for, and we'll talk about some of these: forearm rotation, your swing path. Is it out to in? Is it in to out? The face angle, right? Face is obviously going to play a role in direction. And then the loft, it plays a role in distance as well. I'm a huge club face guy. I think club face is king. But in pitching, to me, if the face is reasonably square, I'm not going to go crazy with that. If we're trying to hit a higher, softer pitch shot, then I would just have someone either go to the next more lofted club or just set the face open if they need that, or vice versa, square it up if they have the face too open. Weight distribution, to me, I like to start even. Ball position, I like middle. Stance width, I like a little bit narrower. So my go-to setup would be stance at most shoulder width apart, but ideally a little narrower than that. And why? Well, if our stance gets wide, your body actually starts to get lower, and therefore your hands will get lower and the club will get lower. So the arc of the depth of the club gets down too much. It gets too low. And we'll look at that, the arc depth here in just a minute. But that's, be careful that you don't get too wide. You want to be a little narrower, ball middle, I like shoulders and spine neutral or more level, not leaning one way or the other. I like even weight distribution. You might grip down just a little bit for some people so their arms can hang a little bit longer. And then I like, from a face-on perspective, I like the shaft neutral to maybe even just slightly forward. As far as the plane goes, I don't go crazy as long as someone's plus or minus within a few degrees of a so-called swing plane, that's fine. There's probably a lot of other things I would look for first, but it is a component, and for some people might be important. Loft and speed. To me, I use that line a lot with average golfers. The loft of the club and the speed that you're swinging play the biggest role in distance control. Obviously, centerness of contact can be a factor, but when I'm talking to my average member at the club, loft and speed to help them just remember and understand that. So that means you either change clubs or you're going to have to change the speed of your swing. You can do that through the length of your swing or the pace of your swing, maybe the pace that your arms are swinging or the pace or speed that you're rotating through on the forward swing. So those would be just most of the components that I'm looking at and thinking about. Okay, steeps and shallows. Yeah, we'll get to that one next. So steeps and shallows. There may be one or two items that I left off the list because I wasn't thinking about it, but this is how I think about it. So to me, I mean, it's really no different than the full swing, but for pitching, it is a little more important, right? The club's not moving as fast. And if the club isn't moving as fast and the club's interacting with the ground can grab the club, so to speak, or the club gets stuck in the ground. So to me, it's matchups. It's steeps and shallows. It's up and down, it's side to side, it's thrusting in and out, it's left and right with the club face. So to me, it's matching things up, but it's also balancing things out. So for example, if someone, these are things that are steepeners, radial deviation, right? That steep, sharp wrist set, that's more of a steepener. The club, the attack angle generally moving down is a steepener, not always, but it is. Weight more forward would get the club moving more down. Spine and shoulders tilted down and forward. Narrow radius arc. We're going to look at some pictures. The hand path. This is a huge one as well. The hand path. Hand path moving down is going to put the club more into the ground. Your swing path out to in, and then more of a vertical plane. And then shallowers are just the opposite. Ulnar deviation, we'll look at a picture of that. A flatter attack angle, obviously. If your weight's more even, then that's generally going to help the club to slide a little bit more. Spine and shoulders down and back, that's an error I see a lot of golfers do. That in and of itself could be a big reason why someone sticks the club in the ground. Again, the width of the arc, right? So if you're wide in the takeaway or wide in the downswing, that's a shallower, right? And it might be, someone might do it too much. And we'll look at some examples of that. The hand path, more up, is a shallower. We're going to look at that. Again, that's that horizontal hand path, as I call it. The swing path into out generally, right, would be more of a sweeping or a shallow motion or a less vertical plane. Okay, this next slide is a biggie here. This is huge. The height of the arc or the depth of the arc. So this is me hitting a pitch shot. I would say that my action tends to be a little more shallow. So that yellow line, the arc of the bottom of my club coming down through impact and then coming back up again was pretty good. This club just gently thumped the turf and then kept sliding. So, for example, when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about those components that I talked about, and specifically on the next slide, we're going to look at things that are really directly related to the height of the arc. So, for example, let's just assume that the yellow line, the arc, the height of my arc was perfect, okay, or a really good place. So what would be things that would make someone's club get below that line and hit the ground too deep and or before the golf ball? right? Or what would be things that would keep the arc above the yellow line and cause someone to blade it? So this is a big piece of the picture. We go back to that first slide. What's the big picture? What's the arc of the club coming down? And specifically, what's affecting, or how the things that someone does, how is that affecting the height of this arc and the low point of the club coming into the ground? So we want to avoid things with an individual that are going to make the club get below that arc where you're going to chunk it. And like I said, someone could have actually a steeper attack angle than I have. I didn't hit this on TrackMan. I don't know what my attack angle was. Let's just guess that maybe it was two or 3 degrees down at most. Well, let's say I was someone else who had an attack angle that was coming down at 5 or 6 degrees. Well, just because that attack angle is steeper, you can do things at the last second to keep the height of the arc above the ground and not stick the club in the ground, versus you could have a really shallow pattern, like you let your right wrist out and it actually makes the club hit the ground before the ball. You actually were shallow, but you hit the ground too deep or too far before the ball, and you get a less than desirable result. So managing the height of the arc is a little bit different than steep or shallow with the attack angle. And we'll look at, when we talk about the horizontal hand path, I'll mention that again. But the heart of this is, I want you to have this image in your mind of the club coming down. What's the height of the arc? And then where's the low point? If you look at the bottom right picture where I have those 2 green arrows kind of slanted in a little bit, that's where I'm guessing about the low point occurred. Even though I'm a little shallow coming in, I caught the ball first, right? I mean, even though the club is probably starting to brush the grass back at the leftward green vertical line, that's where my club's starting to get low to the ground, and it's brushing the grass just before the ball, but it's still not going to bottom out until it gets up between those green arrows. So anyway, this arc height is a big deal. What are things that are going to influence the club being higher or lower or just right? Okay, and here is a list of biggies. So ball position. How does ball position relate to the height of the arc? Well, for example, if you did everything perfect, but you had the ball forward in your stance, right, you might catch it as the height of the arc's coming back up again. So, or vice versa if the ball was back in your stance. So it's more of a setup piece, but the height of the arc and relative to the ball position plays a role. The width of your stance, we already talked about that. The wider you get, the more your body goes down. The hand, your sternum and your hands get lower to the ground, even if it's incremental. That little inch of lowering, if you're wide, is going to get the hands down and get the club to bottom out. So you actually see, I like more of a narrower stance that keeps you taller. Distance from the ball, you could look at this a couple different ways. I think probably the most common thing is if you got close to the ball, depending on how you set up with your body, if you get close to the ball, it could make the club go down into the ground. If you backed away and your swing, if it in fact made your swing path more rounded, you'd be shallower. There's exceptions to that rule, but distance from the ball, I just like having the shaft in a somewhat neutral position from the target line view, or maybe just a degree or 2 on the vertical side. But you want to make sure someone's not too far or too close. Obviously, where someone grips it on the club, right, is going to affect the length of the club or the length of the width of the arc and where that club comes into the ground. Your arm structure, which we're going to talk more about, keeping that more constant, keeping your left arm long, letting your right arm have a little bit of fold and staying bent throughout a good portion of the swing, and not changing, not narrowing your arm structure, not widening the arm structure, because that's going to affect, again, if we go back to this picture, when you change your arm structure, it's going to change where the club bottoms out. That's arm structure, radius, or the width of the arc, the same thing. The wrist angles, changing your wrist angles can change the height of that arc. That's a biggie, wrist angles. This screen right here is really important. So I'd take a picture of this, or just most of these pieces get an asterisk on this page. Horizontal hand path, we're going to look more at that. The connection of your lead arm to your torso is a biggie, because if you're rotating and you get a little bit of, the next one says lead side rise. We're going to look at that when we look at some drills. We want to make sure if our arm stays connected and as we swing through, our body's gently standing up, that helps to keep the club out of the ground. That keeps the club up and not down. Extension and flexion of the body, as I talked about, those are ups and downs. Anything that's making our body go up and down is going to play a role in the height of the arc coming down into the golf ball. And then attack angle, we talked about that. It plays a role for sure. There's other things that you can do to offset, let's say, a more downward attack angle, which would be this horizontal hand path. So even though that attack angle might be coming 5 or 6 degrees down, you could do things that would pull you back up out of the ground so you're not sticking the club in the ground. Okay, so let's look at this shoulder and spine tilt thing here. These are actually side by side. These pictures are actually just me in a normal setup. I just drew a sharper line on the right to show you what I often see. So let's just assume that a player did everything perfect in their pitching motion, with the exception of setting up like the picture on the right, where their shoulders are too steep from front to back and their spine tilt was back. That theoretically could get the club to hit behind the golf ball. Okay, so that's something I look a lot at in the setup. So when I say have neutral patterns, you can see my stance is narrowish, ball in the middle, shaft neutral, barely forward. And I would call the picture on the left, I would call that pretty neutral. But my point is, we'll see a lot of golfers set up with a lot of spine tilt to the right and the shoulders to the right. And again, that's going to get the low point behind the ball big time. And then anytime that low point is behind the ball, right, or the club's getting too deep into the ground, that's when you see people then have to pull up and in large part compromise their arm structure. And we'll see some examples of that. All right, so by definition, to me, this would be the width of the arc. So the top two pictures are too wide. The top left picture is an exaggeration of a wide arc in the takeaway. If you notice how far away from my right thigh the butt of the club is, or the inside portion of my glove hand, to me that's a little wide, where the arms are wide out away from the body. And then the picture in the top right, the arms are wide as we start down, right? So to me, that's a dangerous one. Then the bottom left is the backswing. That's a narrow backswing where the arms have almost no width. So they're narrow with a very deliberate wrist set. Well, that's dangerous. If you're too narrow, right, that club is definitely going to start to work more down. The low point could be too far forward where someone blades it just because they're too narrow going back. And then the bottom right picture is narrow on the downswing. And again, you can see that if you're narrow, that generally keeps the club head high and that attack angle is very sharp. So just by looking at the takeaway and looking at the width of the arc can really help. I like a gentle connection, a comfortable connection, again, of the arms up at the armpit and the top of the rib cage next to the pec muscles. So you can see these are exaggerated ones. I'd say the two most common of these would be the bottom left. People are narrow in the takeaway and set their wrists too much or just too soon, or the top right where people are too wide, especially we're going to see this in a little bit. The right arm or the trail arm lengthens or extends, or what I call thrusts, the trail arm thrusts in the downswing, right? So therefore the low point can either be behind the ball and or that would get the club just down into the ground too much. Arm structure, this is a huge thing, right? So we want our lead arm, in this case is a righty. I want my left arm to keep its length. And as we swing back, we want the right arm to fold. So if you look at the leftmost picture, the bottom left, side by side, you're going to see my right arm has some bend to it, and that's a good thing. So I'll use the image of a triangle a lot. The only caveat there is that you have to be careful, because some people will like take it literal and keep their right arm or their trail arm locked so the arms are in a triangle. Just make sure you tell people we want the arms in a triangle at address and as we swing back, but let the right arm be soft and fold a little bit, because we're going to need that right arm to have some bend as we come down into the golf ball. If we straighten that right arm too much, the club's going down into the ground. So we want to maintain consistent arm structure because it keeps the radius and the width of the arc constant. So this is why to me, it's arms, it's wrists, and it's the body motion as they influence the width of the arc and the height of the arc coming down into the golf ball. And if you could see the picture on the right, at impact, yeah, I personally don't happen to have that much rotation in my lower body on a pitch shot, but that is impact. The picture on the right, you can see I'm hitting the golf ball. My lead arm is long. My right arm has a very, very soft, mild bend to it. And then as I come through to the finish, the bottom right sequence, there is a little mild bend in the right arm, and the hands are in. You can't see the hands in. You can't see the hands, and the club is out. We'll talk more about that. So look at arm structure. We're going to look at a drill, and we're going to, when we look at some lesson examples, we're going to see how people, it's easily one of the top 5 errors in pitching is people lengthening their trail arm. Everyone still with me so far?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Hopefully you're not asleep yet. Wrist angles. So flexion and extension, that plays a role in the loft of the club, right? It could play a role in the direction. If you really flipped your wrists fast enough, the face could close. So it plays a role in loft. But also if you look at that, especially the top right picture, if you went into flexion or extension of the lead wrist and flexion of your right wrist, how that could lengthen the arc right at the bottom, and you could get the club too low into the ground. So it affects loft, therefore it affects distance, but can affect the contact. So I like what I call just quiet wrists. Yes, you're going to I want quiet wrists in the takeaway. Yes, you're going to set your wrists in the backswing, and then we want to maintain at least some of that in the downswing. We don't want to unhinge it completely, but we don't want to maintain it completely. This is a big one, radial and ulnar. Radial deviation, right, where you set your wrists and they go towards the top bone of the forearm. That's the radial bone. And then if you let that right wrist out, and the picture's on the right, that's ulnar, right? And that's lowering the club. That's a shallowing pattern. It's shallow. It could still put the club down in the ground, but that's shallow, where radial is steep. So looking at the wrists combined with arm structure is a big deal. And then pronation, supination, right? That can affect the plane of the club a little bit, or the path, but obviously can also affect the face angle. So I like to say that as you start, the top edges of your forearm are looking to the sky. As you swing back, keep the top edge of your forearm to the sky. Don't change or don't rotate, don't pronate or supinate your forearms, because that's going to change the loft of the club especially, which is going to affect distance. Now, sometimes in some instances, you might want to gently roll the forearms to open the face. But for me, most people, I'd rather just start with the face at address where we want it and then not have to change anything. Doesn't mean you have to do it all the time, but to me, that just makes sense. All right, horizontal hand path. We're going to look at this some more in video, but this is basically what is the path of the hands relative to the horizon. So if you look at the top sequence, the top left, I'm at address. The middle, the path of the hands go up. And then the top right picture, the hands are coming back down again. And then as we come through impact, the path of the hands quickly go back up and around. And that is a huge deal. So, you know, the saying with tour players, they have low launching, high spinning pitch shots. Well, to launch the ball low, assuming you hit the ball somewhere near the middle of the face, plus or minus a little bit, you have to be taking loft off the club, right? So to take loft off the club, the shaft has to be leaning forward. Well, if you lean the club forward, how do you not stick the club in the ground? Well, that's because your hand path quickly goes up and in and around. And that's that lead side rise where we get you kind of push out of the ground. Your left leg will straighten, your left shoulder goes up, and the hands go up and in while keeping the shaft leaning forward where you're taking loft off the club. And if your attack angle matches up to that just right and you get that spin loft, let's say somewhere around 50, 55 degrees, now you can increase the speed. Horizontal hand path, double asterisk. This is a huge deal, right? And you can see now how this would affect the height of the arc. We'll look at more of this in a few minutes. And then toe line, heel line. I would call this a drill, but to me, it's a very important concept. This is a huge one. I got this from Chuck Cook years ago. I use it all the time. Not that every good pitcher is exactly like this, but again, if we're working with most players, our club players, I just think it's a good image. Toe line, heel. So I say toe line, heel line, thump, and finish. Toe line, heel line, thump with the sole, and then hold the finish. So as you go back, the bottom left picture, that's my backswing. As you go back, I like to say your lead shoulder, elbow, wrist, and club should generally be in a straight line along the toe line. And then in the bottom right picture, you want to have generally that same pattern in the downswing. Again, this would be kind of like my go-to pattern, kind of like a baseline model, so to speak. It doesn't have to be this way, but it's a good place for most people. So on the downswing, the bottom right, you can see I'm right back along that toe line. And then as I come through and finish, the picture's on the top. You can see if we look at the top right picture, so I have that yellow line on the ground in the top right picture. There's my heel line. So we go toe line, heel line. Well, the green circle is showing the left arm up at the armpit and the pec and the top of the rib cage. The left arm is connected to the body. The hands, where the red arrow is, my hands get to about my left hip, left heel line. That's why the top left picture, you can't see the hands. It's because the arm stayed connected and synchronized with the rotation of the body. And you want to get the hands and the club shaft to finish somewhere around the hip and heel line. And that blue vertical line is just to pretend like there's a wall behind you. And let's say that wall came down towards the target. As you come through, you want to make sure that your arm stays connected with the rotation of your body, and your hands would get to that heel line, a hip line. They would get to the wall. You almost want the hands to get to that wall first. You wouldn't want to flip the face or roll the face where the club hit that wall first. So this idea of toe line, heel line, thump, and finish, like I just used this in a ladies' clinic the other day, to me, this is a great foundational platform to work off of. And then keeping an eye on basic arm structure. You can't go wrong. Okay, these are some things, if you were watching me teach, listening, things I would kind of say out on the lesson tee. Have more sole in your short game. Thump with the sole. I say that all the time. Just use the sole. You want the sole to gently interact with the ground on a chip, on a pitch, on a bunker shot. You can't go wrong. As long as that leading edge doesn't get down too much, thump with the sole. And the reason I say that a lot is because I think a lot of average golfers get so afraid of hitting the ground if there's someone that struggles with chunking them or blading them that they never get the club in the ground. Well, we need the sole to thump to get down under the ball. I already mentioned quiet wrists. I like quiet wrists in the takeaway. I like quieter wrists through impact, especially for someone who is wristy, so to speak. And that's also why I like more of a medium grip pressure. And sometimes I'll tell people to go with a firm, not tight, but firm grip pressure. If you can see they're holding it too loose in the club and the wrists are moving all over the place, I'm not afraid to tell someone to firm up their grip pressure. What goes up must come down. That kind of goes back to that picture of if someone has a low, wide takeaway, their arc is too low and they never get the club up, Well, what goes up must come down. If you don't get the club up enough in the takeaway, there's a happy medium, right, between getting it up, but maybe not having too much wrist set where it gets sharp. For those people that take the club back too low, you want to say what goes up must come down. Let the club go up and down, like let it go up a ramp. So maybe you put a bunker rake a foot and a half or so, 2 feet tops behind the club, or put a club on the ground. They've got to let the club go up and down the ramp. Slide, skim, or sweep is something for people that are steep, or I just like to say that in general. In most cases, we want that club to slide, skim, or sweep along the ground. Arms in a triangle, I talked about that. Arm structure, arms in a triangle in the takeaway, arms in a triangle through impact, and especially in the finish. We're going to look at some lesson examples where people lose arm structure. I think having a low finish is good for a lot of people for a basic pitch shot, at least conceptually, because a lot of people, again, the club bottom wants to bottom out before the ball, and then they pull their arms in, they lose structure, they chicken wing it, and then the club rehinges and finishes high. So I like a low finish. That gets them to thump the ground and not rehinge the club as much. Not that you can't, because you'll see good players do it. But for the average player where their contact isn't good, I like a low finish. I also say this all the time. I just referenced to this. To me, chipping is a miniature version of pitching, and pitching and bunkers are the same. It's all interchangeable. All this technique and these components that I've talked about, to me, tie together. Loft and speed create distance. I say that all the time. The average player just doesn't think of that, and I find it very beneficial. We already did toe line, heel line. Arms deep and shaft steep is a bad combo. So that's something you want to look for. If someone pulls their arms in and they get deep behind them or trapped, and the shaft is very vertical, it's really hard to recover from that and to consistently hit good golf shots. So we want to keep the arms, again, that's where the toe line, heel line drill and concept is good, because it helps people to keep their arms in the club at least somewhat in front of them. Okay, so just be aware of that. U-shape versus V-shape. Some golfers, if they're too steep or have too much V, I'll tell them to visualize a big U, a club coming down on a flatter, more shallower angle of approach, and vice versa. Some people have too much U. They need that up and down the ramp. They need that V-shape. I already referenced top edge of the forearms to the sky. For some people, I think it's really good to just remind them to keep loft on the face. Don't let the face close. Don't, have the wrists be quieter. For someone who's trying to hit a little bit, if they have a trajectory problem or they're trying to hit a higher, softer pitch shot, I like to say keep a loft on the face. Don't change the face. So for them, instead of maybe thinking internally about what the body or the arms are doing, they can think more about what the club face is doing. I already talked about neutral patterns, and for me, that's universal. It's just a preference I have when I'm teaching it to our average player. I want neutral patterns in chipping, pitching, and bunkers. That means somewhat neutral with alignment, neutral with weight distribution, and then pattern it to the individual. If someone needs more of one or the other, then you can customize it. Hands in, club out, that's a biggie, something I look for. Hands to the wall, we talked about that. Again, that's keeping the arms connected with the rotation of the body so your arms aren't becoming disconnected from your body. Lead side rise, we're going to look at that some more here in a few minutes. We talked about grip pressure, and then connection. And this is a line, I use this a lot with my juniors, but sometimes I'll use it with adults. No stinky armpits. So if the top part of the arms are connected at the armpit and the pec and the rib cage, we don't want that to become disconnected. Okay, so we don't want people to expose their stinky armpits. All right, so now we're going to look at some drills. So actually, I got through that just a little bit ahead of schedule, so that's a good thing. Any questions on that so far?
There haven't been any submitted quite yet.
Okay, all right, good. If there are, please fire away. Maybe as we get into looking at the videos here in a minute, you'll have some questions. So again, what's the big picture of the arc of the club? What are the components of that big picture? And specifically, what are some major components that are going to affect whether the club gets down into the ground too low or it's too high on that arc, the depth of the arc? Okay. If you want to follow me, this is where you can find me: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I'm starting to put some more stuff up on my YouTube. And my website's just more of like a basic kind of landing page. I am going to be updating that. How much content I'm going to have on there, I'm not sure yet, but give me a follow if you want to. I try to post some stuff. All right, I'm going to switch over to my iPad now. Hopefully I don't mess this up. Are we going here, Ron?
Yeah, I can see your broadcast. Oh, there you go.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. So let's start with the drills. Were there any questions on any of the stuff I put in the slide? So you can see I did put a good bit of stuff in there, and I just felt like at least when you leave here, you'll have a picture of the components that I'm looking at and I'm thinking about, and then obviously I've highlighted some of the more important ones. So let's start with the drills, and then we'll look at a few lesson examples. All right, let's start with this one. So this is the drag drill. So you can see I'm just making a point to show that I'm using a tee. So you're going to tee the ball up. Now I got this drill from Andrew Rice. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. I didn't know if the volume was down. So I got this drill from Andrew Rice several years ago. Also, if you really do like pitching and you're intrigued and you want to learn some good stuff from other people, Andrew Rice has had an influence on my pitching teaching. James Ridyard has had a big influence. Then there's a guy, James O, who played the PGA Tour. He's on Instagram now. Give him a follow. He has phenomenal content on greenside shots. All right, so here's the drag drill, and this has to do with that horizontal hand path. You can see I'm dragging the club, and watch how the hands really come up. Watch my left side. I'm kind of pushing out of the ground. The left leg's going to straighten. The left shoulder goes up and around, and the path of those hands go up. So that's how you could actually have a steeper attack angle, but not have the club get stuck in the ground. It's kind of, we call it displacement, where the club, I call it displacement anyway, the club's coming down 5-6 degrees, but then all of a sudden, and you catch it just right, but then you pull up out of the ground and the club doesn't stick in the ground. Now, I'm overemphasizing the shaft lean here. So what you're going to do is you put the club on the ground, foot and a half behind the ball, and you drag this where you're dragging the sole of the club and the leading edge along the ground and then coming up and out of it. So you would think, right? So if tour players have low launching, high spinning pitch shots, we know they're taking loft off the club, but they don't stick the club in the ground. And this is why there's this displacement, so to speak, where they quickly keep the club, the height of that arc, more at the ball and not below the ball, because they're standing up, they're pulling up, and the path of the hands go up and in and around. So this is how you would guide someone where their hand path is staying down too much or they're sticking the club in the ground. So you drag it a couple times, drag the club, and then let them stand up, get the left shoulder high, get the hands coming up and in, and you can see my body stand up, okay? So I'm exaggerating that handle leaning forward. So the point is you can have the handle leaning forward and even a fair amount. I'm not saying you have to, but you could, and not stick the club in the ground. I think that's a very common belief that if the shaft's leaning forward, you're going to automatically stick the club in the ground. Now you can see my club is just about on the ground, but watch how quickly the club comes up. See how I really picked it off the tee there? So that's the drag drill to help the horizontal hand path, okay, come up and out. So I'll draw 2 lines. By the way, as a note, this is why it's really important to have an iPad and film all your lessons. Don't just film your full swing, film your short game, show people, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words. So if you can show them and then explain the concept, that's powerful learning. See how those hands quickly come up? All right, so I think you get the idea. This is like double asterisk, horizontal hand path, the drag drill off of a tee. All right, secondly, we're going to see in a few minutes, we're going to look at some examples of a lot of golfers will lengthen that trail arm, and that's what gets the club down into the ground too much. So this is an exaggerated drill. I think visually it's powerful, and then feel-wise, it's very beneficial for an individual to be able to see this. So let me actually go over here first so you can see. Let me come over here. So what you do is get in your setup, tuck the arm, and have that arm be, close to a 90-degree angle. Then what you're going to do is you're going to point the lead 2 fingers out. Perfect. So we're going to point the lead 2 fingers out, bring the lead 2 fingers over your left hand and push it against it. So you're going to feel that backwards bend in the wrist, and it almost helps to compress the arm gently against your body to keep this. And this is why I talk about arm structure, right? Because yes, the right arm is going to be straightening through impact, but for a lot of average golfers, they thrust the arm, and again, the club gets stuck in the ground. So this is a really, really powerful, impactful drill. So I'm pushing against those 2 fingers. I'm feeling that pressure in the right wrist, keeping that right arm bent. I swing back. You can see I'm pushing against that. Maintain that. Keep that arm bent, and you can see coming into impact, right, as we get into the full swing, that would be really helpful. But with pitching too, that's an exaggerated drill to help people not lengthen or thrust that trail arm. So I love that drill. And then what you do is you do that a few times, and you really, once you lock that in, then you're feeling your core swing you through. Lock in that arm structure, keep it constant, and just rotate. You can see how that keeps the right arm bent. Again, you wouldn't need it or necessarily want it that bent, but it's a good exaggerated drill. And then what you do is you pick up a club, have someone come back, right? You lock in that arm structure, left arm long, right arm's folded, but you're maintaining the width. You lock that in. Now I'm tapping my belly just to say, remember, now you lock in the structure and use your core to rotate as you come through. So if that right arm doesn't lengthen too much, that keeps the height of the arc up, in contrast to someone that would thrust that trail arm, which again is extremely common. So I love the right arm bent drill. Plus in the finish, that's maybe a little exaggerated, but again, I like to see some bend in that right arm in the finish. You don't want the right arm dead straight. Okay. And this one. This is not anything revolutionary by any means. This is just tucking your shirt. So you just take the material below the logo, put it under your armpit, and just stay connected and use the rotation of your body to swing through. I still believe in telling people to swing their arms and feel the arms. But obviously it's this synchronization, this nice combination of your body and your arms. So just by having someone tuck the shirt, I think it's a nice way to help someone keep the arms connected and synchronized with the body. And also, if you stay connected and you have any kind of gently lead side rise, that helps that the horizontal hand path work up. And you could see the arms are in somewhat of a triangle. So I think that's a powerful image. Also, you could tuck on the right side for someone that gets too wide or too low in the takeaway. have them tuck the material under their right arm. All right, so the drills are the drag drill, the right arm, the tuck the shirt, and then the toe line, heel line, putting sticks or clubs on the ground along the toe line and the heel line. That's kind of, it's a drill and a concept as well. Any questions on any of this so far?
None submitted at the moment.
Okay. So that's either a good sign or a bad sign. Okay. Let's look at some examples here. All right, good. We're at 53 minutes right now, so doing pretty good here. All right, first example. Let's see here. All right, here's a good one. So okay, now I'm going to flip the screen. Let's see if this works. This is the one thing we didn't test, Matt. Oh,
Perfect.
Beautiful thing. All right. So this is actually a buddy of mine. And he's actually my hockey coach in Philadelphia. So for those of you who know me or follow me, you know I'm kind of a hockey nut. And so this guy gives me lessons, and he's a member at Lanark now, and he's a golf nut. He started taking lessons with me 3 years ago. Good athlete, obviously, but has learned a lot. Didn't really know much about the golf swing. So this was last fall. This is just a good example. And let's watch what happens on the left here. So just a couple observations, right? His stance is wide, and what are his shoulders and his spine doing, right? They're down and back. You just see that all the time. So he's got a wide stance, shoulders are tilted. What about his distance from the golf ball? Really close, and his posture is, to me, very upright. Like his butt's sitting down and under him, right? His butt is way behind his heels. So horrible posture. And I could have done even more when we look at the after. Okay, so let's see what happens. So he's a golf nut. He plays and practices all the time, especially in the summer when hockey season's not at his peak. And he's doing this. Uh-oh. Doing. Look at how saggy he gets through impact too. Okay. 2 different shots. Same time, obviously, but 2 different shots. Uh-oh. Here we go. Doing 2 in a row. So what the heck do we do with this guy? All right. So he actually has, that would be a shallow pattern, right? There's 2 shallow patterns. The plane is very flat, and the swing path or the swing directions coming in to out, right? And let's look at his wrist. His right wrist is slightly bent, but not that bent, right? So he has a lot of shallow patterns here with the club working in to out, standing too close to the golf ball. And he said to me, he's like, I do okay out of the rough. I watched him hit a few out of the rough, and then I watched him here. But quite honestly, even his shots out of the rough weren't that great. Yeah, obviously you've got the cushion under the ball, so he could get away with it sometimes. But I mean, this is just, you know, Shanksville here. So let's go ahead and look at what I did. So we'll go to the after, go target line. Again, I could spend an hour just showing you a bunch of examples, which I think is valuable. That's how I always learn the most, is watching people teach, or, you know, watching this kind of stuff. Okay, so what's different? His stance is narrower, right? Ball is middle-ish. His posture is better, right? And he's fractionally further away from the golf ball. Okay, so let's look at the target line view. So what I did was I explained to him, I showed him on video. Again, that's why when you're teaching short game, have an iPad, show people. Picture's worth 1,000 words. That's probably, at least to me, 70% of getting someone better is giving them a concept. So if you give them a picture and then explain it to them, explain what they're doing wrong and then how you're going to fix it, you know, you're well on your way for most people. So we got his setup better, right? His butt's not under him as much. And now we're going to watch that club go back. So see, he's going more toe line. The club works a little more up. It works down. So see how the swing direction is a lot more neutral. I mean, this literally took 5 minutes. So he's a good athlete, so that helps. And then I was like, okay, so we're going to get the setup cleaner. We want the club to go back on the toe line. Let the club work up a little bit, and then just keep your arms connected to your body and rotate and get the hands over to the hip line, to the heel line. That's why that toe line, heel line is just, it's gold. And again, that comes from Chuck Cook. It's gold because it's good for your short game and it's great for the full swing too. Okay, so that's what I told him. Clean up the setup, go straighter back on the toe line, stay connected and rotate, and you can just see how much better that was. And instantly the ball flight got better. So that's just taking those components that I talked about, looking at what's in front of you and starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Any questions and comments on that one? Okay. Okay. All right. This one I'm going to show you real quick. This was actually a chipping lesson, but I think that there's something to be learned from this. Okay. So this is a good player. This guy's from out close to Harrisburg. He'll come and see me. Started taking lessons from me at Aronimink 2 years ago. He's a golf nut. He's definitely has a well above average golf IQ. He's one of those guys, he kind of takes pride in knowing and learning about the golf swing, but he couldn't figure out why he was struggling with his chipping and his pitching. So all in all, overall, the setup looks good. I guess I caught the target line. I caught this a second late, but the shaft is somewhat vertical at address, even though he's taking the club back a foot. You can see, right? He doesn't have the shaft too low. You know, everything pretty much looks good here, and he's a good player. I think he's like a 6. Okay, so what are we going to see here? So he's a little narrow, right? His hands didn't get outside his right thigh. You know, I would try to get him just a touch wider in the takeaway, but that's not what we worked on. But other than that, I mean, you know, his overall structure is good, right? The left arm's long, the right arm has a little bit of bend. His wrist angles are pretty good, right? He's got a little bend in his right wrist. The left wrist is flat. There's not a lot of wrist movement here, excessive wrist movement at all. See how that club kind of got stuck in the ground. So guess what? We see this all the time. If the club bottoms out before the ball or the club gets stuck in the ground, what are we going to see coming through impact? We're going to see some kind of reaction, and it's probably going to be in the form of shortening the arms to try to get the club out of the ground. So let's see if we see that. See that club gets stuck, and then he compromises his left arm. He has to, right? Or the club would stay in the ground. Now this one, you know, these were like pretty much back-to-back shots within 2 or 3 minutes of each other. Here's a target line. You know, path is good, plane is good. He's on the toe line, face is reasonably square. Watch what this one does. You can't always tell on video until we look at the ball flight. What'd that do? That was low, and that thing went sailing past the green. And that's his life as a good player, either, you know, and then he catches some just right, but it's chunk, blade, some just right. So what the heck do we do here? I only told him basically I gave him one concept. And what I did was I gave him the horizontal hand path concept. Okay, if everything looks good, now watch his head. What's his head? His head's staying down a lot. Watch in transition. Where's that left shoulder and his spine go? It almost goes down and forward. You see that? So if his lead side is going down and forward, that the hand path is going to stay down, and the club's not the height of the arc isn't going to be high enough. The club's going to go into the ground. So all I basically did was I told him, I educated him on what horizontal hand path was. I just showed him visually a couple times, and then away he went. I don't have the after here, I'm sorry. But basically, all I did was tell him, listen, let your head release, let the left shoulder, get the left shoulder to come up out of the ground to get the hands to come up. And now the height of the arc won't be as low. And that's all I told him. Okay. So that's what I did. But the two biggest things you'll hear people say is, oh, I didn't keep my head down, or I'm moving all over the place. You hear people say that all the time. Some of you are probably kind of chuckling right now, but that's not it. In fact, he needed to be taller through impact with his torso. He had a little too much flexion and his head was staying down, and therefore the hand path was staying too low. He couldn't get the club up out of the ground. Okay. Very, very common. All right, what time are we at here? Maybe I'll just show one more. Who do I want to? Maybe I'm going to show two more if you hang in there with me. Let me show you Mr. Seifert. He's an old Marsh member. Now, this is going to be a bunker shot, but you know how I said to me they're all universally interchangeable. So that's why I wanted to show this one to you. Oh, shoot. Bear with me here. I'll try that again. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so yes, there's a lot of green grass down here in Florida right now, guys. All right, so this was just last week, and I thought this would be a good one to share. All right, so let's look at, again, to me, all of these patterns, right? With bunkers, it's about the height of the arc, right? And getting the low point to be in just the right spot. Some people need to have more steep patterns. Some people need to have more of those shallow patterns. It's about matching it up to the individual. By the way, Mr. Seifert takes some lessons, works hard on his game, really good player, but he struggles sometimes with his bunkers and his pitching. So far, right? I mean, he looks like a good player. The setup looks good. The grip looks good, right? Wow, things are looking good here. They're looking good. They're looking good. And then all of a sudden, boom. So that right arm lengthens, right? And then he loses the wrist angle, right? And that right wrist goes into, it's straightening out there. Okay, so the right wrist is now getting the club down into the ground, and he chunked it. So he hit some good ones. He hit some bad ones. These are almost back-to-back shots. Here we go. Okay, so here's and over the green. Bye-bye. So he hits a lot of chunks and skulls. So what did we do? Any guesses on what we did? And you can see up near the flag, there's a lot of pretty good shots that he's hit already. Was everyone perfect? Of course not, but he did noticeably better, which is obviously always a good thing. So this is what I gave him, because everything looked good except that right arm lengthening and the right wrist lengthening at the last second. We did a pause drill or stop and go drill, which I like. And the reason I like that is because with that stop or that pause, it gives your brain time to remember to tell the body what the heck you're doing. Because if you go too fast and your brain's not thinking about what you want to do, your body never has a chance to do it, and therefore learning never occurred. So we've got a little pause, and what I wanted to do is I wanted him to set his wrists more radial in his wrists, and then feel like his right arm stays bent and that the attack angle is going to be, in his mind, 20 degrees straight down into the ground. So he has this pause, he sets his wrists, and then the club is coming down on a sharper angle. Now look, he's still going to lose it, but the fact that he set his wrists and he's visualizing coming down on a sharper angle, that gave him really good results. Better results, I should say. Right, all this looks good. The face is open because he's hitting a short one. But look, he's on plane. I mean, everything is great. He just lengthens that arm. But this was better. So he's got to continue to work. It's the only hiccup he has. And I told him that, other than maybe just, I'm going to work on getting his posture a little bit better. So what I would say by definition is I think he has a little too much extension there, right? So if your body's tall, out of necessity, you'd have to lengthen your arm a certain amount to get the club back down to the ball. What if you're tall like that, but you kept your right arm really bent? You'd whiff it, right? The height of the arc would be above the golf ball. So he's got to keep working on his posture. But for him, it was set the wrist, feel like you're keeping the right arm bent, and feel like that attack angle is 20 degrees down. And that got his low point closer to the ball, which got, his results a lot better. And he was happy. In fact, he drove by me at the club yesterday and said that he had a good practice session the other day and it's going well. So that's always nice to hear. So that's just wrists, and then the concept of the attack angle being down. All right, one more real quick, and then I'll take any questions and we'll wrap things up. All right, so here, this one I've got to show you because this is just classic. This is Mr. McDonough, great guy. We have a lot of fun, great sense of humor. As he's gotten older, he just turned 80 the other day, but he takes lessons, he works at it. His game's gone down a little bit as he's gotten older. And his short game's been part of the issue. We work on trying to get more speed in the swing. That's one thing, hitting the driver further, and then the short game. This was last week. Actually, this was, I think, our first short game lesson of the season. And then I saw this and realized we need to spend more time. So he's got a little bit of tilt away from the target. I don't love that, but it wasn't the number one priority. So you could see, look at that. The club is, this was a good shot for him. And there's that breakdown in the arm structure. You'll see that a lot, right? In an effort to not have the club hit the ground before the ball because of what he's doing, okay, he has to pull the club up out of the ground and compromise the arm structure. So what do I see here? I see his right arm lengthening. Let's look at the target line picture. Like, the setup looks pretty good, right? I mean, he fans the face open a little bit, right? The club's out a little bit, but look. And this is what we're dealing with. A lot of chunks and a lot of blade shots. So his arms lengthen. What's his head doing? His head's staying down, right? His head's staying down. And from the face-on view, what's his body not doing? I mean, there is absolutely no rotation until well after, right? Just to kind of fake the finish. And there's that arms break down. And there's that rehinge I was talking about that you'll see a lot of people do. Well, those are two ways to get the club out of the ground: shorten the arms and then quickly rehinge the club. So arm structure breakdown, arms not really connected and synchronized with the body, and the body's not rotating. So that's what we worked on. And let's look at, and not by any means was this anything special, but it was better, right? I mean, he has a good setup. The handle's gently leaning forward. His grip's good enough. So there he's thinking about that right arm a little bit, trying to keep the right arm bent and then trying to rotate. So he's got some rotation there. The arm's staying connected. It's better. Is it pretty? No. But it was better. So that's what we did. And he had some better results. Everything wasn't perfect. So those are just a few examples of some of the things that I'm, some lessons and how those match up with those components that that I talked about. Let me see if I can just, maybe I could stay on this here or switch back. All right, am I back here?
Yes, you are.
All right. Any questions or thoughts before we wrap things up?
If anyone does have questions, feel free to unmute themselves. We'll just go like that till the end.
Also, Matt, is there a way is there a way to email those slides to everyone, or should I have them contact me directly? Because I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I can certainly send it to the attendee list via Golf Genius. I'll just upload it to our.
Okay, I'll send that to you. That way, folks have it, and you kind of having it in front of you can be helpful. So.
Any questions?
Yeah, and that's why I think it's good for everyone to have it, so you can just review it and just kind of keep looking at the checklist. And it just takes time to kind of wrap your head around it, but it's certainly not rocket science if I can do it. Just the more you teach it, the more you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So, but thanks everyone for tuning in, and look forward to getting back up north and seeing you soon.
Thank you very much, John. I thought that was great.
Thank you, John.
And we had a real good group today. We were close to 50, I think. So that's really good. Thanks everyone for joining. And like I mentioned, this will be up on YouTube eventually. And I will send John's presentation, PowerPoint presentation, out to everyone who attended this morning via Golf Genius. So keep an eye out for that.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you so much.